my pretty teeth, dear.
And he shows them pearly white.
Just a jackknife has back heat, dear.
And he keeps it out of sight. When the shark bites so with his teeth, dear,
scarlet billows start to spread.
Fancy gloves, though, where's McKeith, dear?
So there's not a trace of red. Oh, on the sidewalk, Sunday morning, lies a body oozing light. Yeah.
Someone sneaking around the corner. Is that someone Mac the Knife?
Yeah, from a tugboat by the river, Baba. A cement bag drooping down. The cement's just for the weight, dear. Bet you Mac he's back in town.
The Louis Miller disappeared, dear, after drawing out his cash. And McKeith spends like a sailor. Did our boy do something rash?
Look here, Suki Tawdry.
Jenny Diver.
I said Lottie Lenya.
So with Lucy Brown.
Oh, the line forms on the right, dear.
Now that Mackie's back in town.
Welcome to The Long Way Round. My name is Malcolm Byrne. I'm your host here at Radio Kingston, WKNY, on the radio and radiokingston.org on the internet. Tonight I have a very special guest. Randy Credico is a political satirist, civil rights activist, host, director, and producer of Love on the Fly on PRN and WBAI 99.5 Radio Pacifica in New York City, and Assange Countdown to Freedom. He's a former director of the William Moses Kunstler Fund for Racial Justice. Welcome to the show, Randy.
Hey, it really is an honor to be on. You got such a great radio voice. I can see you've been doing this for a while.
Well,
you really do.
I'll tell you, back in the early '80s, I was in a pop rock band from Canada called Boys Brigade, and we signed a record deal with Capitol Records, and they had us on tour around this country, and one of the big stops was in New York City, and I forget what it was, one of the rock radio stations back in early '80s. And we went up there to do an interview, and when we finished the interview, the host of the radio program, she came up to me and she said, "Do you know, if things don't work out in the rock band, you might have a career in radio." So I thought it was very encouraging.
Definitely. Well, you do.
Anyway,
I can tell. I've been in this business from like '75 when I was working in Las Vegas doing radio. The Joe Delaney show, I was a regular guest there, who was a great guy who kind of brought me up there and looked out after me. And but he was a great guy, and he had a great radio voice, but I was doing it way back then, and so you recognize those who can do it and those who can't. You know what I mean? You're definitely not a puker who should be on AM, so you're in the right spot. And I listen to you. I drive around a lot. I spend half the year in Olive, New York, which is just 25 miles away. So. So I listen. I also listen to the classical station there, and sometimes I listen to the oldie station. But I listen to you on Sundays. There you go.
Well, thanks,
all right.
Randy. So the last time we met, the first time we actually met in person was at the Waging for Peace event, which was back in, when was that? Was that August or July of this year? I can't remember.
You mean with Scott Ritter and
Diane Sayre and
yeah,
Scott
and
Ritter. And
what's his name? The Italian guy. I'm Italian, so I can say that. I can't think of his name right now.
Gerald Salenti.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
Gerald
yeah.
and Jose Vega.
Yes, I went there, and Garland Nixon was there as well.
Yes,
yeah,
that's right. And we got to hang out a little bit after that event. You, me, and Scott and Garland. We had a nice chat. And
that's right. You were the guy who wouldn't have a drink. All right.
I eventually broke down and had a half a Guinness. So
yes, you had a half pint. Right, right.
But
now I remember every minute of that day. Yes. Yeah. Okay. It's been a foggy period of time between then and now, but yeah.
And then the last time we met was at an event up in Woodstock or Bearsville, to be more precise, at the new Bearsville restaurant facility, and it was an event for Craig Murray, who was just about to launch a 2-week tour speaking on behalf of Julian Assange. So
that was the first event. Was up in Woodstock, and we went, for 2 weeks, and that the first one was there, and that was a nice turnout for a Wednesday night. Wednesday at 5:30, in a place that's really not. It's not Kingston. It's not really Woodstock. It's off the beaten path. But it worked out really well, and I want to thank you and all the others for attending there. That was Craig Murray was doing a tour on behalf of Julian Assange, or just trying to get the temperature of what's happening in this country, activism-wise, and what's happening, in social media and all these other different venues and platforms and on the streets, and just wanted to see what was really going on and what will happen, what his advice would be if in fact Julian Assange is extradited here. And so it was very successful. It really wore me out, I must say. It was like for me, it was a difficult road trip. It would be like the Donner Party trying to make it to California at the very end. You know what I mean? Or the Jode family going to California. So it was a very physically difficult thing to do. I'm too old for it, but it was successful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for those in the audience listening who may not know the name Craig Murray, or may know the name but aren't entirely familiar, Craig was the ambassador to.
From the UK to Uzbekistan.
That's right.
And prior to that, he was ambassador to Poland, or I don't know, maybe he was the first deputy. And then he was in Western Africa for many years. He had like 20 years in the FCO, the Foreign Commonwealth Office. And he's the one that exposed torture and black sites and CIA complicity in Uzbekistan. And as a result, he was sacked by the Blair government. And, he could have stayed on. He'd be living very well right now. He'd be a high-ranking diplomat somewhere, maybe at the United Nations. I don't know. But he wrote about it, Murder at Samarkand. He's got like 4 or 5 books out. The guy's really brilliant, Murder at Samarkand, that details his experience as an ambassador to that country at the very outset of the war on terror, and the war in Afghanistan.
And I suppose his connection with Julian was that he himself is considered a whistleblower. Correct.
Well, Craig is a whistleblower. Julian is a publisher, so there's a difference.
Right.
Craig is like,
I'm sorry.
Craig was like, didn't give documents over. He just blew the whistle on torture by a country that the UK and the US backing and involved in it, and live with himself. And he went public with it. I'm surprised he was not charged with that, never charged with it. I'm not sure now if with the tightening of the screws in the UK, where they can just take you off. There's got an online ombudsman that can just take you off and deplatform you arbitrarily at this point in time. Those who don't go with the narrative on particularly the narrative on situation in Ukraine and Russia. Julian's just a publisher, so he never passed over documents. Someone gave him documents, gave him more documents, cables, and all that. And as a publisher, he did the right thing. He put it out there, and so it rankled a lot of big shots in the CIA, the NSA, the National Security State, and so he's still paying a heavy price for that. He's been, basically shoved away, ensconced in for the last 4.5 years in what would be tantamount to the ground floor of the Tower of London. I mean, the conditions are so bad there. It's very noisy. It's unhealthy. 23 hours a day. And the guy is the most harmless person I've ever met in my life, really. And I've met a lot of people in my 69 years, but he is the most genteel, loving person. He's a father of two. Finally got to see his kids this last week with Roger Waters, by the way. But he doesn't get to see him that often. And he's, like I said, he's in a hellhole 23 hours a day just for publishing information that made the government embarrassed and uncomfortable. And so there was this orchestrated, smear job on him with the false allegations of sexual, crimes or whatever, rape or whatever it was, but it was all BS. It was all fiction that was created by the complicity of the at the time the Swedish prosecutor and the prosecutors in the Crown Prosecutor Services in London, and at the behest of people much higher than them. They wanted. This is way back 2011. They wanted him back. They wanted to quiet him up at that point because he was too dangerous. Rather than just stop committing crimes as they did, the torture and all of that stuff, if they would just eliminate that, tell the truth, and stop lying, then you'd shut Julian Assange up. But they don't want to do that. So that's the unfortunate. He's paid a very heavy price. Basically 11, 12 years as a political prisoner. It's an outrage. And, I've spent 7 years with a show called Assange Countdown to Freedom. It's on abeyance right now. I'm working on other stuff, but I've done so many rallies and events for Assange. I've been down in D.C. for a year, half the year, counting all the days on a billboard truck, with different panels on them, giant billboard trucks in the heat and in the cold and all of that, just driving around the city and doing what you can. But the temperature is not good for him in this country because most people just don't care. They don't know anything about it. What they know about him is the propaganda that was rooted out by the powers that be, so people wouldn't care or either have apathy or antipathy towards him. And so because of that, the situation is not good if, in fact, he were to be brought to this country. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I ranted on for so long.
No, it's, I think, the more we talk about this, the better it is. And I myself have to admit to some element of naivete at the time and almost falling for the narrative, that was put forth. I used to, before I got my head on straight, I used to listen to things like NPR, and actually think that was a reasonable thing to do. And I remember they ran some kind of an article, and they had somebody that used to be involved with WikiLeaks, smearing Julian.
Yeah.
And I just, it took me a little while to sort through the information myself to realize that this was just a bunch of nonsense. And
there's two books out there people should read. The former UN rapporteur on torture, Niels Melzer. He didn't want anything to do with it when he was the rapporteur. He said, nah, he believed all of that stuff. And then he finally did his own investigation. He went and visited him in prison and said, whoa. And he speaks 5, 6 different languages. He went to Sweden. He was in the UK. He's from Zurich, Switzerland, but he speaks all of these different languages, and this became a cause célèbre for him. I mean, he took it on the same way Zola took on the case of Dreyfus 120 years ago. So, and he wrote a brilliant book called The Trial of Julian Assange, which everybody should read, and really see how this organized effort to smear him and defame him and degrade him it's so obvious what they did, and then they mix him up with Hillary Clinton's campaign as if he's the one that had something to do with giving. Like he gave her a campaign map in 2016 that left out Michigan and Wisconsin. She blew the campaign. You can't blame it on anybody else but her. She had lukewarm support. People were tired of those speeches on Wall Street. I mean, she had a million things going. She supported the woman in Honduras, Berta Cesares. She said that she was going to get killed because of Hillary, the union organizer, and she got killed. And she blamed it on Hillary before her death. There's a lot of reasons why people didn't like Hillary Clinton. The same way people don't like Biden. What's the Biden administration? The Biden administration is the Bush administration. They got the same as she had. The same. It's a seamless transition of these neocons and running the foreign policy. People didn't vote for Biden to get what we have right now. They didn't vote for him. They voted because they were anti-Trump. They don't like Trump, but they did not vote for what is happening right now. They didn't vote for Jake Sullivan, Victoria Nuland, and this other clown, Tony Blinken. That's not what we wanted. But getting back to Julian Assange, there's another book by Stefano Morizzi, The Secret Power. So you got two books on him. If you get a chance, and then there's In Defense of Assange. We have like 30 prominent individuals who have written essays on Assange, from playwrights to journalists like John Pilger. Craig Murray's in there, and so many others. You'll realize that this guy, and I was in the embassy 3 times with him. One of them, caused me to be involved in this Russiagate deal, as if Assange was passing information to Roger Stone, WikiLeaks, they got a great story. So they're going to put out a blockbuster story, and before they do it, let's give it to Roger Stone to take a look at it. I mean, it was so ridiculous, the whole premise. But people made that connection, these liberals. I'm a Democrat. I'm a registered Democrat. By the way, I'm probably going to run against AOC for Congress here in a primary. I know my friend Fred Dicker up there in Albany, who I was the official comedian of his show for 15 years. He's been egging me on. My dear friend Fred Dicker, who was the state editor for the Post for like 30 years. And so people like him and people on the left have been encouraging me to run against her. So I'm considering it, even though we don't live in the same district. But she doesn't live in that district herself. She lives in D.C.
Right.
She doesn't go to Greek diners in Astoria. I can tell you that. So, she goes to really fancy Greek restaurants in D.C. and on K Street, when she's picking up money from her big donors, and she wants to be there forever. I know it's very seductive, thinking that you have a position of power, which you don't. The money has the power, not you. I'm not talking about you. But so this is a critical case because and you have people on the far right and the far left on the Julian Assange situation, from Matt Gaetz on the right to Noam Chomsky on the left, and many in between, that realize what is at stake here, which is you having this radio show, all right, and me having my radio show, and people publishing. There is a First Amendment. It's sacrosanct. It's inviolable, and it can't be touched. And so what they're doing, if in fact they can shut down Julian Assange, set this precedent, scare everybody to do what you see on MSNBC and CNN, which I haven't watched in a year and a half, because it's like on rote. It's the same stuff every single day. So why watch it? You can just go back to February of 2022 and then go to 8 months later. And then it's 6 months after that. And you see Jim Sciotto and that other clown, Jim Acostas, they're doing the same reports. So I don't need to see that. I'd rather watch repeats of Bowling for Dollar or The Gong Show than watch that. And they're probably more educational.
I'm a big fan of The Price is Right myself. But.
Well, that was all right. I liked this other show, the one that my friend Jan Murray used to host. Jan Murray back in the '60s. I forgot it was, who I worked with many years ago in Reno, Nevada. Jan Murray, back in '78 at the Sahara Reno in the lounge there. But I'll have to look Treasure Island or something like that. But Price is Right is okay. You're right. Let's make a deal. It's more educational, or the dating game. You'll get more from them than you will from Jim Lang than you will from Jim Acosta or Jim Sciotto. All right, so I've dragged it on too long. But this is a very serious case, and the precedent. Everyone should be circling the wagons around Julian rather than circling the firing squad. So you see all of these people who are upset that Hillary lost. They'd rather take it out on him, and they're shooting themselves in the foot or in the hand because they're going to lose their right of free assembly or free speech. Who knows what this administration right now? I can't think of a bigger danger to the Bill of Rights in this particular administration. In the history of the U.S., I don't think anything has been poses a bigger danger than the Biden administration. And I say this as a Democrat.
I'm a reformed Democrat. Now I don't know what I am, but
I'm a registered Democrat, but that's about it. You know what I mean? Professor Irwin Corey, he was registered as a Republican because he wanted to see what was going on he registered as Republican. He hated Republicans, but he wanted to see what was going on when they sent him something from the Republican Party in the mail, and I don't know, but there was a method to his madness, and but none of us. The last Democrat I voted for was my first vote in life, and that was for George McGovern in '72. Other than my vote against Andrew Cuomo when I ran for governor, and Chuck Schumer, I was actually running as an independent in 2010, and Bill de Blasio. Those the two times I voted for Democrat was for myself in the primary, New York City of New York State. What was I going to say? Oh, it is Esopus, and it is Ashokan River, by the way. And I've taken that walk on that trail up there, and it's really beautiful, and people should spend some time, especially Buttermilk Falls. Have you been to Buttermilk Falls?
I don't believe I have, no.
Have you been to Adams Market?
Sure have.
Yeah, it's a great place. And so is Diamond, I think it's Diamond Hills. Is that it?
Diamond
Hills.
Diamond Mills.
Diamond Mills. I have lunch there every month with Fred Dicker, where he comes down from Albany, and I drive in, and we have lunch there. It's really a beautiful place. And I'm not sitting, and I think it's the Front Cafe or something there on Front Street. I forgot what it is. Go upstairs. There's a wonderful.
Right. Yeah.
Right by the four. What is it called? The four. Stone homes or stone buildings or whatever.
There's four buildings. It's considered the oldest intersection in the United States, and it's four buildings that are the original buildings dating from sort of the 16th and early 1600s and early 1700s.
Right by that beautiful church there. That church, that huge. Is that a Dutch Reformed church? I don't know, but I was in there. They have the biggest organ I've ever seen.
But Gerald Celente owns three of those four buildings, I should say.
He does not. Does he really?
Yes. He got in on the ground floor in Kingston, so he owns actually the
he could have made a bigger donation to the Craig Murray fund. All right, I didn't know that. He could have thrown us one of those stones.
Well, maybe. I'll kick his
throw us a bone or throw us a stone.
Come on, Gerald.
But, that's a beautiful city, that downtown area, that coffee shop down the street from the church. It's really nice where they have the news, and they actually have a bar there too. But I go there a lot. Yeah, that's Rough Draft. Well, Kingston's really a beautiful city. It's really nice, but that whole area is. But listen, we didn't bring up that why I chose that song by Louis Armstrong.
Yeah,
Actually,
let's
by
do that. Let's do that.
Kurt Weill. It was written. What's his name? Is Kurt Weill, and wrote that for Three Penny Opera, and there's a great version by Lottolania, and it's a slow version, different lyrics, and then Louis Armstrong really does a great number. And then when I was performing, I started out in Las Vegas. Really, and I used to have a trio after 5 years behind me. I'd be doing, I'd sing at the end of my show, and always I was an impressionist, and I would close with "Mac the Knife" by Louis Armstrong. His version, imitating Louis Armstrong. But that's the only time the two of them ever recorded a number together, was that particular piece there. Now, is it my favorite tune? There's so much. I like classical music, and I like jazz, and I like Brazilian music, but it was hard to since I almost did Aqua de Marcos by Ella Regina and Tom Jobim, but when I was a kid, I grew up in Southern California, in Pomona, California, 20 miles 30 miles from LA, and another 5 miles away, there was a place called the Royal Tahitian. My dad was the bar manager and the manager and all of that. He was a big shot. It was had a Tahitian motif to it, with tikis and everything. And they had a 36-hole, 18, I guess it was 36-hole golf course, and then a 3-par 9-hole golf course. It was huge. It's called Whispering Lakes. And I used to get to see, growing up from 1960 to until they closed in 69, Bobby Darin was there, Louis Armstrong was there, Ray Charles worked there, the Platters worked there, Sonny and Cher worked there, Ella Fitzgerald worked there, Dick Gregory worked there, and James Brown worked there, the Four Tops, and I got to see them all. Ray Charles. And I got to, on weekends, we'd go in there and get to see the shows. And then I took a picture one day, my brother and sister and cousin, on Louis Armstrong's lap in the showroom, the Tahitian showroom there. The photographer with the Polaroid camera took a picture of the four of us on his lap, and he had his axe with him, his horn. And he was back there, by the way, what he called weeds. He used to smoke weeds. That was marijuana, he called it weeds. And so I got this picture taken, and might be another one, but I finally found it back in 1988. I hadn't seen it in 25 years. And I brought it back to New York with me, and I went to get it blown up and, made it into a really nice 8x10 and give it to my brother and sister. And guess what? En route to that place in a cab, it blew out the window, and I have not been able to locate that photo since. So when every July 4th, Louis' birthday, or August 4th, some people say he was born that day, I rue all day thinking about that photo. It's a really nice, happy ending to a story, isn't it?
Well, if somebody out there found it,
the shark has pretty teeth, dear, and it shows them pretty wide. Just a jackknife has so much dear.
And I can't even do it anymore because I vape. But I can still do Reagan, which is what I did on the Tonight Show in 1984. I did my Reagan impression back then. Yes, and I would say this, and a whole bunch of other. I did Jesse Jackson under Reaganomics for the 1 million people living in poverty. And I did Ted Kennedy and all of those voices. And I even did Hubert H. Humphrey, which I can't do right now. But I don't know. I go off on these tangents sometimes. That's a sign of getting senile, I suppose. Well, I feel like I'm getting like, what's his name, in Amadeus, Salieri. Coming up with stories.
Well, I highly recommend people see the film 60 Days Around the Sun.
60 spins around the sun.
60 spins around the sun. What was it? 60 days. 60 spins around the sun. Because it's
by Laura Keitlinger and Jack Black. He produced it. She did all the work, and that was 2003. I think my life has been a lot more eventful since then, because, what's not in there is when I walked in with the aid of Fred Dicker, gave me a lantern. I dressed up as Diogenes, the Greek philosopher, and walked into a Senate ethics committee on good government, it was a Senate ethics committee. I walked in dressed in this toga and a Merlin, wig and mask and all of that, old man's mask, and it actually got a lot of play. It was on Greek TV. It was AP took a photo. It was on Spanish television. But dressing up as Diogenes this is 2009. And but that's just one thing. That a million things have transpired since then. Like just going to Russia and Ukraine. All right, that's not in that documentary. I did that the same way I would go skydiving. It was on the bucket list, doing something like that because it was very scary. But we're not going to get into that because it's too controversial. And plus, I want to kill this. We've talked about that with Roger Waters, with Scott Ritter, and with many other journalists, and this 14-year-old kid who spoke at the United Nations by video the other day. Her name is Faina, and I actually was interviewed by her about 6 hours ago.
Yeah, I'd love you to talk. I'd like to talk more about that if you could discuss that interview and her perspective and whatnot.
Well, her perspective, she's actually Ukrainian, all right, but she doesn't support the after the coup in 2014, engineered by Victoria Nuland and Jake Sullivan and that crew of neocons. They stole the election. They had this fake orange, whatever you call it, revolution, or whatever it's called, color revolution, whatever. And then afterwards, the people in Donbass were all 90% Russian, and a lot of Greeks there, especially in Mariupol. A lot of Greeks moved there. Did not believe, and did not want to be part of this government that they considered to be illegitimate. And so, they started pounding that region for the next 8 years. And this little young girl in Luhansk, because she had friends shelled. They were shelled a lot. Just like Donetsk. When I was there, I was in Donetsk. In April of 2023. There were Timer missiles flying over my head. Now, I'm not a wartime correspondent, the same way that someone said to Tom Hagen, you're not a wartime Don. You're not a wartime consigliere, Tom. Well, I'm not a wartime correspondent. I went there and not knowing when I got there that I would be going into the red zone, the yellow zone, and the green zone. I thought I was going to go into some safe area there. But, I ended up taking an armored vehicle from eastern Russia, Rostov, all the way down 100 miles to one place where there's this big battle where the Russians, I guess it was like near Kursk or whatever, it's called Saurmagia. That's where they have a big monument. A huge monument there. I went there on a dirt road that had so many potholes. We needed Alf D'Amato. If they had Al D'Amato, he'd fix those potholes. You get to there and then drive another long distance to Donetsk. The first day I'm there, the open air market that day was shelled by Ukrainians on the front. They did it in these mobile systems that they have, and they fire here, and then 20 minutes later they fire again, and they were hitting civilian targets. And then they did a university when I was there. I mean, I was really scared the whole time I was there, but I got to witness what was happening there. And now there's bad things happening all over the place. And no one's rooting for anybody here except for they gotta end this thing somehow. And the people where I was in Mariupol and Donetsk and Saurmagia, all of those people, 99%, I was able to walk out on my own. I talked to people. I had a translator, but I was able to walk around, and to the point where I broke curfew. All right. I walked out at 3:00 in the morning, and there was a curfew from 11 to 5. It's a real no-no. They almost booted me out. And but at any rate, I think the Russian standard vodka had something to do with that because I wasn't drinking when I went there. But by the time you spend 5 days there, it's very hard to stay sober, especially everyone around you is drinking and smoking cigarettes. But it was a very scary experience. I'm glad I went. I'm glad that I underwent this excursion. And it was only because the day before I went out there, the day before I was in Moscow and Red Square and taking the subway system, which it looks like Oz. Every subway stop is this beautiful palace, and unlike the subway system here in New York City, which has got gum and filth at every stop. And so, but the day before, after a week in Moscow, the next day I was supposed to go to, with two French journalists and one Russian journalist, to Rostov. And then from there, an armored vehicle to Donetsk, Mariupol, and there's mines all over the place. And going to Mariupol, you look to the right, you look to the left, and you look at the fields. They got all these white things that indicate there's a mine there. So I send the drivers going 90 miles an hour. 90 miles an hour just to get there. Want to get there quickly. I said, if you slide to the right off this road, we're going to go into a minefield. And so, but just the day before, I had decided not to go because I took one 5-hour course that was mandatory if I wanted to go, of first aid training. And so I took it, and they're talking about red zone, green zone, yellow zone, how to put a tourniquet on, how to stop the blood from coming out of an arm without killing, and making dead the rest of the limb, where they have to chop it off. I'm going, this is like a year course. I can't do it. I'm 69 years old. I got the vision of Mr. Magoo. And so I said, afterwards, I'm not going. I'm not going. I told everybody I am not going. They said, okay, but at least wish us goodbye tonight. We're going. So I said, all right. So we went to a place called Dr. Zhivago's, and we had dinner. And the next thing I know, after like 2 or 3 bottles of Russian Standard and St. Peter's vodka, I woke up the next morning on a train halfway to Rostov. All right. So I had no choice. Landed in Rostov in the afternoon or evening, and right next to a airfield, a military airfield. And you hear the jets and the helicopters. And that was, I said, oh my God, it's going to get worse than this. And so I never felt comfortable again until I got back to Rostov a week later. I would be sleeping in between the bed and the wall, as if that's going to ease the impact of a Heimer missile going through the window. But like I said, I'm glad that I went now that it's over. And it was an incredible experience. Listen, a lot of children have died there. And this girl is a powerful spokesperson. Faye, and I can't even say her last name right now. I have to look at it. But she's a powerful spokesperson. She's been there. Like I said, she's Ukrainian. She does not want the West to continue intensifying and escalating this war, because it's going to amount, and especially with these cluster bombs, children like her are going to get killed. All right, that's who's going to die, are children. So we got to be mindful of that. We have to come to grips with the fact that part of the country, which was always Russia for centuries, it was Ukraine was if you look at the history of it, Khrushchev gave it to them, I believe, and for I think to have another vote at the UN, basically. But there's so many Russian speakers, and the culture and the desecration of the Russian Orthodox Church, and the jailing of priests there, and the repression of those who want to practice that religion. Like the last day I was there, the last day I was there on my way to the airport, what did they do? They shelled the Russian Orthodox Church in Donetsk in the morning at 5:30 when they're young, early worshipers, mostly women. 3 or 4 of them were killed. And then like 20 minutes later, and they did it when I was in Donetsk a week earlier in the week at that open air market. They shell it again when all of the EMT people are there, in emergency vehicles are there, cleaning up and everything. And so they shell it again. And that's been the MO. And then 2 days later, when I was back in New York, they hit a school bus in Donetsk. So, that's got to stop, and then that this little girl, it's not as bad in Luhansk as it is in Donetsk and Mariupol. And those places are a lot better right now. I mean, 14,500 people were killed between 1914 and 1922, or 2014 and 2022, by the Azov battalions. And I went to administrative offices. You saw what happened in Canada. It's near you in Ellenville. There's statues to Nazis there.
I've been there. When Scott Ritter told me about that, I went down there to see it.
So you're the one who took the picture, Scott Ritter. Okay, when he went there. Well, I did not know that. Craig Murray wanted to go, but I said, you know what? I'm living up here. I don't want them to get my license plate and follow me around. But
it's a youth camp, so it can't be all bad.
Huh?
It's just a youth camp, just training the
next
generation. Is that what it is?
I mean, I know, but you got these kids in the summer, like in brown shirts, long sleeve shirts and red ties, and it really harkens back to 1938, the Hitler Youth. I mean, I know it's not the same, but when you lionize these SS Waffen 14 Galatia members. I mean, 33,000 Jews were killed there. All right. And they took part in 100,000 Poles. That's irrefutable. They did. All right. So Babylon there, I heard all the graphic stories. And when I was inside this administrative office in Donetsk, I saw 2 or 3 tables. I got pictures of it, full of paraphernalia and the literature and photos of Hitler and all this stuff that was taken out of the Azov stall in Mariupol, all right, and put on display there. It was really terrifying to look at. And you saw with Justin Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, they knew about this 98-year-old man. I mean, you got to come to grips with it. Yes, they brought in 2,000 Nazis. I mean, the U.S. brought in scientists that weren't part of. They brought in scientists. That's bad enough. But they may have been. They built stuff that killed people, but these guys were actually killing people and enjoying it. All right, so it's even worse. Bringing in 2,000. Ukrainian Waffen SS, combatants, and they say, well, they fought to liberate Russia. Yeah, that's what they were doing. That's why they hooked up with the Eisen group is to fight the Russians and kill Russians. But most Ukrainians, and there's monuments to them in Red Square at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, they fought bravely against the Nazis. This is a specific group. You can't paint it all with the same brush. The Ukrainians are not Nazis, but there is a Nazi element within that has a lot of power there, and they fought. And I would say that most Ukrainians do not subscribe to this kind of anti-Semitic philosophy.
None that I know personally. None that I know personally. I
know. Listen. I have Ukrainian friends here. I mean, I know a guy on the subway who does. He's a worker on the subway. He's Ukrainian, and I go to Coney Island, and there's a lot of Ukrainians out there, and I know this couple that they're a music team together, and one of them does comedy, and so it's a sad thing, all right. And they certainly are not Nazis, but you cannot deny that history, and the fact that this is really a scandal that's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to go away for Justin Trudeau. Now, his father, who I used to like because he opened the door to draft resistors back in the 60s and early 70s, he's the one that suppressed this great liberal. He's the one that suppressed and would not let it be known. And it took the Simon Wiesenthal Center to expose it. just like the Jewish newspaper exposed the People's Heroes Park and those monuments in Ellensville, and when we're 90 miles away. There's more Jews in this city than any city in the world, okay, in New York City. And 90 miles away, they have monuments to people that killed Jews for fun. That was their creed. They can't. This is an outrage. 60 miles from the state capitol. Why isn't Schumer doing something about this? Get rid of those monuments. If they're going to get rid of Confederate monuments down in the South, all right, who had they fought, they weren't murdering people based on race. You know what I mean? Robert E. Lee is a lot different than Heinrich Himmler. All right. So if you're going to take down those monuments in the South, they should take down the monuments here in the North for people who did crimes against humanity.
Well, maybe we can start a petition or a movement or something and get, because Scott, he's the one that told me about it. And we're back on the radio. You're listening to The Long Way Round here on Radio Kingston. My name's Malcolm Byrne, and my very special guest tonight is Randy Credico. Randy.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah, you're there.
You're
back. I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about I guess you'd consider him your mentor, William Kunstler.
Yeah, well, he played a big role in my life. I met him in 1986. I'll tell you how that happened in Las Vegas. I was working there back in the 70s in the lounge at a place called the Royal Casino and some other places there. My best friend at the time was the tennis pro at the Hilton. And so I spent some time there one day, and I met Mort Saul. And so I got to know Mort Saul, and I did a TV show, the Forrest Duke Show, a couple of days later. A local entertainment show, and so with Mort Saul's wife, one of the Kim sisters, which was a South Korean lounge act, the Three Sisters. And so I see him again a few days later, and he says, "I saw you on with my wife." He says, "What are you doing those impressions? That's all you're doing. Why don't you do something political and something that's substantial and whatever." I think it was 75, 76. So I went out and I said, "You know what? He's right." And I got a pile of books. One of them was the Chicago 7 trial, the transcripts. And I read it, and I said, my God, I laughed every time Kunstler went up there. And just without listening to him, just reading it was his way of delivery. You can't tell his timing and delivery, but just the gist of in his arguments and the ironies and all of that. And I said, I got to meet this guy. And so in 85 or 86, I ran into a friend of mine at some mob joint called Columbus on the Upper West Side. And it was Joey Heatherton. I worked with Joey Heatherton in the lounge at the Sahara Hotel in 1979, 1980. She was in the main room, usually working with Don Rickles. And so I run into her. Now, she was on the lam. She had stabbed her boyfriend. She got caught with cocaine up in Rockland County, and she had slapped the passport clerk and litany of other transgressions. And so she had a beautiful apartment, but she had no cash. So I called up Kunstler from the Gramercy Park Hotel. It was like 6 o'clock at night, and she's telling me this story because I'm looking for a lawyer. Jerry Lewis was trying to find me a lawyer for, and so I called up Kunstler. I said, "This is a great opportunity for me." I was very opportunistic, and I left a message on the answering machine. And the next day we were back there again. I said, "Let me do this again." So I called up like at 1 o'clock. I said, "This is Randy Credico. I'm looking for him with Joy." He said, "1 second," and he got right on the phone. He said, "Come on down." He took over the case. All of her cases, exonerated her on everything. And she and I had a falling out. She and he had a falling out, but he and I became great friends. And over that 9-year period of time till he died, by the way, his very last public appearance was with me and Irwin Corey. I said, I'll get to that in a minute. Well, let's get to the end first, because I had been traveling with Bill all of 1995. He was sick. He had like a heart thing, and he was coughing a lot, and so his book came out. My my life as a radical lawyer, and so we actually. He loved Friendlies up there in Kingston. We did something up there in Kingston or Woodstock. I don't know. The very first one, his first book tour stop was there. And then we went to Chicago. We went to L.A., Seattle, and I forgot where else, like 10 cities. And so I said, Bill, when it was all over, I said, you know what? I went to all these book events, and I'm watching him like really regale galvanize the crowd, and people are laughing, they're smiling, they're crying. I said, you got to put that. Why don't you let's do a show, some kind of go on the road and speak, because it's not just Noam Chomsky stuff. You got Dick Gregory mixed up in there. You know what I mean? That kind of humor. So I Caroline's Comedy Club, where I had worked many times. I spoke to the Louis forgot his last name, Ferranda. I said, I got to agree. Can we do? He said, yeah. So we did something there. I had the Terry Waldo Quartet, and I had Irwin Corey and IMC, and Bill closed the show and got a standing ovation. And it was just a knockout. You went backstage, and there's some. If you watch it, you haven't seen it. I got to get you a video of it. If you see it, you will see him and I. Entertainment Tonight took some footage, and it was the New York Times did a story on it too.
There's a little snippet in the 60 spins around the sun. There's a few snippets.
There's
for
a
you guys.
piece of that, but it doesn't show us backstage where he and I used to watch the Maltese Falcon with Bogart and Mary Astor and Peter Lorre and Sidney Greenstreet a lot, and Elijah Cook Jr. And he did a great impression of Sidney Greenstreet, and I would do Bogart, and so we did it backstage, and that's on video, and it's in the video that I have, Consular Caroline's. You'll see that, just like he was just knocked a room. He knocked it out of the park. And then he died 2 weeks later after that, on Labor Day, 2090, September 4th, 1995. But in between, my father did 10 years in prison, so that had an influence on me. Bill Kunstler got people out of prison. Bill Kunstler introduced me how to use the court of public opinion, or to, if I had a cause, to somehow put it in my act in a way that would I could not influence, but at least it would be more appealing. I had done the Tonight Show in '84, and some of the things I said were not appealing to the average person. But Kunstler,
they weren't appealing to Johnny Carson, that's for sure.
Huh?
They weren't appealing to Johnny.
No, Johnny didn't like it at all, but it's okay. He didn't like me doing his voice. He didn't like me calling Gene Kirkpatrick, Eva Braun. But Kunstler, in between, I did a lot of stuff for the Attica brothers. I drove them to Jersey a lot in those early days, for some trials there, and I went to court with them all the time. And then in 1988, I had this tour of Nicaragua called the U.S. Out Show. We were going to Nicaragua because I had been there for the previous 3 or 4 years, a big supporter of the Sandinistas. That comes through in that documentary by Jack Black and Laura Keitlinger, produced by Jack Black. And Kunstler was going. I mean, he organized. He and I did a bunch of benefits to raise money for this trip, and I took 4 comedians, including the late Barry Crimmins, and I took Jimmy Tingle and Bev Mickens and Joe DiCaprio and myself. I went down there and toured the country. But Bill Kunstler had a case that came up just like a day before we were supposed to go, so he didn't get to go with us. But the 20-year anniversary of the rebellion at Attica, I planned that with him. I mean, I just spent a lot of time. And whenever a girlfriend would throw me out of my house, Bill Kunstler would take me in. You know what I mean? And we did a lot of events together. I mean, not at the Village Gate. He introduced me at the Village Gate when I was performing there for the Bye Bye Bush bash in '92, and for fair. And I spent a lot of time, like I said, if he'd go out with his family up the country, I'd watch the house and I'd drive him around. He's a difficult guy to drive around with because he'd always cut it really, really, too close. Like he was supposed to go out to Leavenworth and see Leonard Peltier, and I had to drive him to the airport to LaGuardia, and it was like a 5 o'clock flight, and we leave at 4:45 on a Tuesday in New York City, which is crazy. And we take the Williamsburg Bridge. People say, well, he's cheap. He never uses the Midtown Tunnel. No, if the Williamsburg Bridge is the fastest way to get there. But, on Delancey Street, there was so much traffic, and he got out of the car and started screaming at the cars in front of them. And he was going nuts because, he was cutting it too close, but we made it just in time. But that's the way he was. He didn't want to drive with him if he was in a hurry. But we did so many things together. I can't even tell you. And he also appeared on a show that I did I think it was '94, called 60 Mimics, which was a parody of the Be Like the Onion or whatever. It was fake news, but I did. He played some of the characters in there, and I did a lot of voices, and it was like 30 minutes of a parody of the news, but it came out like a real news show. And I had
probably closer to the real truth than 60 Minutes anymore.
Yeah, no, it was really good. And Bill played it. His wife was the co-anchor, Margaret Kunstler, and Robert Knight, the late Robert Knight, who Fred Dicker knows. He's been up there in Albany. Was the co-anchor with Margaret, and it really sounded like. It was the very first 5 minutes of the story about George Bush being kidnapped and taken to Panama to face a trial for the killing of 5,000 people in the invasion of Panama in '89. And so he's there, and he's denying that he's not Jorge El Terrible. It's things like that, and a lot of great news stories. Irvin Corey played a big role, 60 Mimics 1 and 2. And you got to hear the whole thing. It really came off very well. His son is very talented, Richard Corey, Irvin Corey's son. He played a lot of different parts. I mean, I had Daryl Hammond from Saturday Night Live playing Dan Rather. And I had Laura Flanders, Amy Goodman, and I had a cast of about 70 people on that over the course of a couple of months. And we only were able to put two together because there was so much blow being snorted in the what do you call it, in the editing. Back then I did that. I mean, I got out of comedy for a long time. I stopped working the clubs and being associated with comics in '97 when I was working with Richard Belzer on his one-man show called Another Lone Nut. They did for HBO, and I co-wrote it with him and put together a lot of videos. And we spent a lot of time he did two bad shows. I mean, really, it went into editing. It was very difficult to try to make it into an hour show for HBO. But the problem was we were doing a lot of, illicit drugs, doing a lot of cocaine. And after that was over, I said, that's it, man. I'd like to kill myself. And I got away from it all. I went to Tampa, Florida, as if there's no cocaine there. I went to Tampa, Florida, and checked into a cheap motel room. And then I learned about the Rockefeller drug laws from a guy who was on C-SPAN with whatever that dude's name is. And
Brian Lamb.
Brian
Lamb.
What's the name? Yeah, the guy Lamb. Yeah, it was the I think the 100 and something year anniversary, 150 year of de Tocqueville's, his rendezvous around America to the prison system. He didn't come here. Everyone thinks of the democracy, his stuff on democracy, Newt Gingrich's his book on democracy and all of that. His intention was he went around the country and ended up at Sing Sing to examine the penal system in this country. There's a book. There's a book on it, and I think it's only available at the University of Southern Illinois in Champaign County, Illinois. All right, University of I don't know if Southern Illinois. But someplace I worked there one time in a bowling alley, converted into a nightclub, lasted a week back in '75. So I don't want to go back there. It was a nightmare in my Pinto that fell apart on my way back.
At least it didn't catch on fire.
Yeah, well,
Pintos
I went to a club there. This is how difficult the show business is, okay? This really underscores how difficult it is and what people will do to get on stage. A guy saw me at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas. This guy, he invited me out there, and so I drove in a Pinto all the way to Champaign County and to this place, and it was a horrific room I was in. And I was supposed to be there for 4 weeks. And after 2 days, I had no money. The guy wouldn't give me an advance. So I opened up this used Pinto, the back seat. I pulled it up, and there was 75 cents in change, which I went over to the, what do you call it? Kentucky Fried Chicken there, and bought a thing of large fries and 5 muffins or whatever they are, those rolls. And I made sandwiches, and that's how I made it for the next couple of days. And I finally got paid and fired, and had to drive all the way back, and came back with like 30 cents in my pocket. But I'm just, I've worked strip joints. I've worked all over Florida. I've worked some horrible gigs out in airspace where there was like 200 people and 90 teeth between them. All right, so it was these were difficult, but you'll do it just to get in front, and it's okay. You have to go through, this baptism by fire if you really want to work as a strong stand-up. It can't be that easy. I don't think Jerry Seinfeld ever had that problem. But for me, I really went around like one of these boxers that goes from city to city and has a 15 and 75 record, in those early years. But I was in show business, and it all led, if I didn't do that hard work, I would have never been on the Tonight Show. But of course, I'm the only comic who ever did the Tonight Show whose price went down the next day.
Maybe only a few people in this audience, very technically capable people, are able to live a path, to choose to live a path, to choose to go their own way.
Got breaking news for you, and I have to tell you the pictures are shocking from London today, where Julian Assange's long standoff with international authorities is finally over.
My microscope is hyper-focused. Yo, I always try to rhyme the dopest. My whole life I try to write my opus. I'm so fucking sick to always try to diagnose it. PCR test these bars kinda like COVID. Some type of gene in me, I need to see the CDC. Treated like I'm diseased because I think on different frequencies. Vis-a-vis my skill of rhyming, it's kinda like biting a pill or chilling on some psilocybin. A real giant, I'm defiant when I bless it. The rhyming I perfected like the scientific method. I gotta rap a polymath, I mollywop these cocky cats. I leave them in the body bag and probably pass a polygraph. I told you I'm Muhammad Ali in a boxing match. Wanna scrap, drop you on your back like Connor, bet you tap. My brain's an almanac, containing all the facts, the plays and all the stats, the Rain Man of rap.
They're threatening to prosecute Assange and lock him away possibly for decades. Decades. That's a blow to the very foundations of freedom of the press. Freedom of the press. Freedom of the press. Freedom of the press.
Hideo Nomo, winner sensei, kimono slow-mo. I raise the blade, then decapitate the dojo. Make MJ the logo of the NBA. Make my name the definition of not playing any games. Any distances in range, I can get it, piss and rain. Playing chess as I'm hanging in the middle of the lane. I'm trained in all terrain, frozen snow and falling rain. And now I turned into a ball of flame. My domination is global across all nations, like COVID inoculations, like social indoctrination. We ask, who's controlling the population? If life is a simulation, like robots and automation, with focus and concentration. My soul went beyond the matrix. I'm floating in inner space and painting with constellations. Brain is like I'm a savant, bring a mental renaissance. Came to say the truth at all costs. Julian Assange.
It's unclear whether he will be extradited to the USA.
If you're going to play with fire, you're going to get burned. Play with fire, you're going to get burned. That has changed the way journalism is done.
It's a track called Julian Assange by Old Boy and T the Human from the album Julian Assange.
Well, you could hear it better than I could. I'm going to have to send me that track so I can hear it myself later. I'll listen to the show later if it's going to be if there's a podcast on it. But
yeah,
I couldn't hear it that well. But I did hear Julian Assange's name mentioned many times and about extradition and all of that. I'm glad somebody is. There's 5 or 6 songs out there. For Assange.
Well, what I wanted to say, Randy, there. I don't know how many times I've heard this. I'm sure you're a victim of this same statement too. It's like, we talk about these things and people say, well, if you like it so much and, if you're so crazy about Russia or someplace, why don't you move there, or something like that.
Right. Wait a second. Before you go on, it's my friend Barry Cremens had a response for that. You know what he'd say? Because I don't want to be victimized by U.S. foreign policy.
That's a great line. I'll have to remember that. But
I mean, look, you live in the U.S. So I mean, you know the country and you know people, and it's look. I don't. Right now is a dangerous time to live here. You got to, the CIA could be listening. I'm not a conspiracy guy, but I know the equipment that they have. I know a lot of former NSA people. They can hear everything that you say. They're keeping tabs. This is becoming a totalitarian Orwellian society, and it's going right. It's right before our eyes, and we're not seeing it. Everyone is zapped out on their cell phones. I went to Coney Island. Just like I go there all the time. A couple of days ago, and in the car going in, a car coming back that I was in, there'd be like 45 people, and 44 of them are on their cell phones, and they're not reading Dostoevsky or Emerson. So some people might be reading their Kindles, but I don't see much of that. I see people, what I call it, or it's like an opium den. It's the new, opiate. It's the people are like snorting or smoking a pipe load of text messages around the clock. They can't go without it, and so they're so distracted by it. And at the same time, every single one of those person has a GPS for the. Not most of them are not going against the system, but the ones that pose a problem, truth seekers and all of that, people that might want to demonstrate or want to organize an event, or they'll be targeted. So you get all of the 250 million people on their children now. I mean, it's the biggest danger. They shouldn't sell. They shouldn't sell drugs near a school, but they shouldn't sell cell phones near schools either, because it's really a danger to our minds and to our liberty. And the fact that people are not great communicators. You talk to people on the cell phone all the time. They're not really great orators. They don't. You talk to them. They're like a machine. So they become zoned out. The same way someone would be if they're smoking crack or smoking opium all day. They can't get away from it, and that's a big problem. It's a paradox, that here we have this social media possibility to do good things, and but it's being used to waste our brains and inoculate us from any kind of meaningful participation in this country. Nobody votes anymore. You'll get lucky if you get 35% that vote in the next election. They just don't care, and a lot of it has to do with there's ennui, and there's this. Remember, Jimmy Carter talked about a feeling of malaise. There's a feeling of malaise in this country, and constantly having this mechanism next to your head, in your ear, and radio transmissions or whatever that stuff that goes back and forth between the satellites or the towers and this thing that keeps this thing going. I don't know. We live in a sad state right now. The thing is, it's so possible. Look at the demonstration. Look at the labor movement back in the 1920s. They didn't have cell phones, but they could get 100,000 people over here at Union Square. Look at the Martin Luther King getting all those people to D.C. without cell phones. Look at all the people that showed up in Chicago without cell phones.
Hey, they got how many 100,000 people to Woodstock, and there was.
Right, they got people there without cell phones, and it was the wrong place.
They had toilets.
They had to change the location 50 miles away. People all showed up. And now I can't get anybody. There's no anti-war movement. And people don't feel. They have no idea what's going on right now. They have no idea that there's going to be a shift. Something big is going to happen with the dollar. $30 trillion in debt. $30 trillion in debt. And Saudi Arabia is getting off the dollar as the reserve currency, and the BRICS is happening, and we're so far in debt we become like a naked man with a gun that's broke, and gun smoke at a bar. You know what I mean? He can't do anything but use the gun, but he's not getting his money back. Well, I don't know.
I watched a really interesting interview just yesterday on CGTN, which is the Chinese government television network, and it was this in-depth interview with Bashar al-Assad, who had made his first trip to China, I think, in 20 years, and it was so incredibly revealing to listen to that person, love him or hate him or whatever you want to say about Bashar al-Assad, but clearly he his message was, we've been oppressed for 500 years from this Western colonialist idea, and we're looking to the East to look to the future. And so many countries are doing that, and what we can either, my feeling is like we can either join the thing or be left out almost.
I don't know. There's a day of reckoning coming. Everyone knows that with this $31 trillion in debt. The cities. Look. I was up there and I was complaining to Fred Dicker about this. I keep mentioning his name because he's a dear friend of mine. I know he might be listening. But I was up there where I was in Albany, and I went to this with Scott Ritter. I went to this restaurant there, Dinosaur Grill or something, Dinosaur Barbecue. And I forgot what's the city that abuts it. I can't think of it right now.
Troy.
But the roads were so bad. I thought they were bad here. Coming over the George Washington Bridge, you go down the West Side Highway. That get on it, that on ramp into it. There's like 5 potholes in a row. You have to be very careful. This is New York City, the capital of the world. When I was in Moscow, you didn't see potholes anywhere. The streets were clean, like all the way to the airport, which is like 30 miles away, 40 miles away. There was no potholes, no tar on the road. It was remarkable how clean and it's like Singapore. You know what I mean? This city is a mess. The infrastructure around the country is a mess. You know that. So you go anywhere, D.C., Detroit, Houston, Chicago, the infrastructure is in really bad shape. Just take a look. Get into the subway here. They come infrequently. You got a horrible mayor here who has no idea what he's doing. That's part of the problem. But there could be some kind of WPA program to resuscitate the subway system and the roads. The roads are very bad. But I don't know. I see they're doing something on 87 to clean up. But it's like you see like a quarter mile that needs a quarter mile of road there that needs to be fixed, and you see the same crew there 2 months later. Because they, gave, whoever got the contract gave a lot of money to the speaker or the Hochul or Cuomo was all pay for play. You know what I mean? So, they drag it out. I saw like, on the Williamsburg Bridge, I remember like 10 years ago, for a whole year, there was just a little patch in the island as you got on the Williamsburg Bridge into 278. And they were there for a year, a whole year. I mean, the pyramids were built in like, 10 times the Empire State Building in a year. All right. They can't do this in a year, like, 20 square yards, not even 20 square feet, So so there's no money allocated for that, but there's money allocated for a war. There's money allocated, 800 bases around the world. 800 bases, Can you imagine that? How many Soviet, Russian bases are near us, or Chinese bases? There's 800, and 400 of them are around China. So if people just knew what was going on, I mean, I don't want to be spending my money on that, having nuclear weapons there. The whole thing is getting out of control. But as we are slipping, as this economy is, really facing, and I think that's the reason why they're wigging out so much, the West and, Canada and the U.S. and the U.K., is they feel this is an existential threat to them, their desire to somehow maintain global hegemony. I mean, I'm speaking as American, which is like almost anti-American, but I'm trying to look at it. If I was like doing this objectively, I'd say, yeah. I mean, look, do I want to live in China? Do I want to live in Russia? I don't know. I don't know if I want to live in China. I don't know. I'd have to live there for 4 or 5 months. I don't know. Would I like to live in Mozambique? Would I like to live in Cuba? I don't have any friends there. So I have all my friends here who are still alive. Those are my friends. And so you get comfortable, and you don't want to move somewhere. You want to fight within and try to help out this country, live up to its original promise of America by Thomas Paine. Have you read that book?
I have not
Promise
read that
of
book.
America by the founder of this country.
You're the second person who's actually recommended in the last 2 weeks.
It's written by a friend of mine, Harvey J.K., who I interviewed a bunch of times years ago. Actually in a parking lot in Kingston across from Hannaford's, because there was no cell phone. My engineer and editor, I was in the rain there in North Carolina, and Harvey J.K. is in Wisconsin. Did like 4 shows. 4 shows is what it was on Thomas Paine, a fascinating American. And of course, all the stuff that he wrote, he inspired Washington. Crossing the Delaware, the crisis in America, those papers.
Was he the one was he the one that sort of advocated for the idea of common sense?
Yes, he wrote Common Sense,
right.
Which, he wrote he wrote the first anti-slavery pamphlet, all right, in 1773. Benjamin Franklin got a recommendation from somebody in London or Paris. And when he came over here, he got a job in the bookstore, and then he started writing using a pseudonym. And he wrote this. He wrote "Crisis in America." It wasn't by Thomas Paine. It was by, I don't think. I know one person that liked all of his work, and that was Abigail Adams. The person that hated it was John Adams. All right, because he was an aristocrat. Paine actually subscribed to this. this new society that was coming. He believed in taking care of the Social Security system for older people, and he was pushed aside, man. And then he went over to France, and he wrote The Rights of Man over there, and the people in London hated him. He was hunted down when he was there. He ended up actually in a French prison, and was supposed to be executed the following day. But since the night before, he had a hard time sleeping, they left the door open for him. All right, they trusted him. He was a member of the National Assembly, and so when the guard went over to get the people who were scheduled to be executed that day, his number was obfuscated by the door being open, so that's how he lived. And I forgot who the Governor Morris hated him. I think he was there at that time and did everything he could not to save him. But Promise of America is a great book. Without pain, no twain, as they say. He was loved by many and reviled. Reagan actually mentioned him in 1981 at the state of his inauguration. Reagan alluded to Thomas Paine. Not that he would subscribe to everything that he espoused. Teddy Roosevelt hated him the most, even though he'd been dead for a long time, but detested his philosophy. And he was a great bridge builder. He built a suspension bridge, or he had designed it. Just a remarkable guy. And I don't know where he's buried. Nobody knows where he's buried. Somewhere off of the Sawmill. Forgot the city, but somewhere there. Paine is supposedly buried. They actually got a song out called Thomas Paine, The Bones of Thomas Paine, and Thomas Paine's bones, because they were shifted around the same way. What's her name? Eva Peron, her body was moved around a lot because they didn't want to make it a shrine. The generals who had the coup, they kept the body. It was in Germany, I think. It was London, and now it's in the family plot at the Cementerio Recoleta in Buenos Aires. But they don't want monuments to people that have a popular following that goes against the grain of those who are at that moment in power and seek to do bad things.
We are just heading into our last half hour. I'm joined by very special guest Randy Credico. Randy, thanks you so much for being on the show. You're just a fascinating person to talk to. I've never quite had this kind of conversation before. I wanted to ask you. I made a bunch of notes and so forth, but I haven't really needed to refer to them. But what I did want to ask you about, because it's actually something I could probably use a bit of advice on myself at this stage of my career. First of all, where do you find the balance between? I mean, clearly at one point your career was a stand-up comedian. That was going to be your life, and then at some point things shifted, and how do you balance these? Like, what I mean to say is, I've lost a few friends over the past couple of years because of my personal views, and I'm sure I've lost some work in the process too. But it's difficult for me to not adhere to my moral principles.
Yeah. Well, that's all you can only do with there's something inside of you that is a guiding light. Look, there's that, what do you call it? Gnosticism, where you got good and bad. There are a lot of things in my life that I wish I hadn't done in my lifetime. But, when it comes to my political beliefs and my moral beliefs, and not that I always put them in practice, and stuff like that, principles that you have. Look, it was ingrained in me when I come from a working class family. Mother made 33 cents an hour as a waitress when before I was born. And my father did 10 years in prison. You grow up in that environment, and we all became alcoholics and all of that. It was a great life, but there was a bad side to it. I don't know. Look, my principles were really, I was 12 during the Vietnam War. I was born in 54. So in 66, 67, I could have gone either way politically. The Vietnam War, especially when I was 15, 16, was crystallized in my head as something immoral. And I had a cousin of mine who had a big influence on me. He was far left as you can go. He went to Berkeley and all of that. And he was a draft dodger, and then I had a older brother who was a real right wing guy. He could, if he had influenced me, I allowed him to influence me before my cousin did. I could have gone in a different direction, but and my grandmother, who was a FDR, a racist FDR Democrat, you know what I mean? She liked him because she got
square
Social
that
Security.
equation.
Yeah, but just from the South. In the South helped. These Democrats hated Republicans in the South, and they went with Roosevelt. So my grandmother was one of them, FDR Democrat. But why Lincoln was a Republican, I suppose. But I've had many opportunities. When I was on the Tonight Show, when I was in Las Vegas, and I was like, my career was going in the right direction at that time. What really tipped it for me was in 1980. I was working after Reno Sahara. I talked about other people that worked there, Wayland Flowers and Madam. I was in a review called Pinups 2001, and there was Cher worked there, Dick Shawn worked there in the big room upstairs. And then there was a show called Burlesque USA. It was something like Mickey Rooney did Sugar Babies. Eddie Bracken and Eddie Bracken and Red Buttons. Red Buttons was the the top banana, and Eddie Bracken was a straight guy. And, they did these routines and the dancers and all of that. So I got to know Red Buttons really well. Red was a 50s hardcore liberal leftist, you know what I mean? And it wasn't caught up in the Red Scare back then, the HUAC and all of that somehow. But he was always a progressive Democrat. And I remember when Reagan won in November of 80, and the Senate swung, people like Frank Church were now gone, and all of these other Birch Pye was gone, and others that were swept out. Republicans had the Senate and the presidency, and Red was crying, and he said, "Look," he says, "they got all the rope now." He says, "Let's see if they pull it." So, and that was it. The show closed. Red went on his way. I went on my way. But before I left, Red said, "You have to move to New York City. I know where your politics are. What are you doing working these lounges in Reno, Tahoe, in Las Vegas? Where are you going with that?" He said, "I know your views. I know you got talent. You should go to New York." So I finally did. The following year, I went to New York City, and it was more propitious for where I was going, even though most comics were not involved in politics at all. In 1984, when I got the Tonight Show, Jim McCauley, the entertainment director, said with the war that was going on in Nicaragua, what was going on in Iran and Lebanon and all of that, what was happening, the expansion of their nuclear capability, all the things that were happening, Contra War, and especially. So I'm talking like Reagan. Reagan would go off and say, "So you take a look at this," and so I'm doing like that. But that's where I went. And then I think it was '83. I was at the Harrah's Hotel in Atlantic City visiting a friend who invited me to George Burns's 90th birthday party. So all you have to look at is date of birth, and it's either 83, it'd be 83, it'd be 90, or 84, I don't know. But I went there and went to the party afterwards. After the show was over, George Burns had a big cake there with 90 candles on it. They were cheap cigars. I said, what's he do with those cigars that are using as candles? And someone said, he smokes them. So Milton Berle smoked great cigars, but not this guy. Not George smoked cheap cigars, and that's the story. It has nothing to do with this. But Red was there. Before I here, I'm going to go off on a tangent. Before I get to Red, what happened that day? We're talking about Milton Berle. Milton Berle smoked Cuban cigars, the best Dominican cigars, and he was at Catch a Rising Star one day, and I had a Royal Jamaica, which back then was $3. It'd be like $20 a day. I was smoking. He says, "What are you doing with that? What are you doing with that cigar?" I said, "It's a good cigar." He says, "It's a Lawrence Welk cigar." I said, "A Lawrence Welk cigar? What's a? Let me give you a good cigar. Get that Lawrence Welk cigar out of your mouth." I said, "What the hell is a Lawrence Welk cigar?" He says, "It's a band wrapped around a piece of shit." But getting back, Red was there. So Red was at this birthday party, and I sat down with him. I said, "Remember what you said to me back in 1980 in November about pulling the rope?" I said, "Did they pull the rope?" He says, "They did. They pulled the rope." He says, "Just keep on fighting." But, and I met Kunstler and all that. But, I'm hard-headed, and I do have strong beliefs. And I, come from working class background, and I grew up with a lot of African Americans. I went to a black, brown, and white school in Pomona, California. I had a lot of friends, Latinos, Mexican Americans, African Americans, and then the Royal Tahitian. That place had nothing but African American performers, save Bobby Darin, you know what I mean, and a few others, Sonny and Cher, I believe. So at any rate, it's just where I am. I have those beliefs. Some people say you're crazy. You shouldn't be attacking the country. You should just go with the flow, and everything will be okay. And maybe my uncle was very upset with me in 1984. My uncle was an ex-CIA agent, and a hardcore Kissinger conservative at the time. He had a book, I remember, Kissinger and How You Win a Nuclear War or something. And but he was old school, very well educated, the University of Florence, studied art and all of that. But he was a CIA guy. And he owned cruise ships, okay? He had a couple of cruise ships. He had no kids. And he and I got along really well, but politically we didn't. And so we'd argue all the time. But he funded, in 1984, I was going through a rough patch. He gave me enough money, finance, where I could work on that year, where the guy from The Tonight Show had said to me, "You're the only guy talking about the upcoming election and what's going on foreign policy-wise. I was the last comic that they auditioned that night at Catch a Rising Star, and he came up to me and he says, 'You can work on this, and we'll get you on the show this year.'" And so that's the biggest dream of a comedian back then, was to do The Tonight Show. That was the dream. And so my uncle, didn't put me up. He paid for my rent, and he did everything. And for the next 5 months, my father got on. And that line about Gene Kirkpatrick, he took umbrage. He was very upset with me, to the point when he died in 2001. In that July 2001, just before he died, he said, "Look," he had 500 acres of land in Abruzzi, Italy, and a big house there, and the meat market, and what do you call Coral Gables, and the restaurants, and they had the cruise ships. And he says, he had no kids. I stayed at his house every couple of weeks. I go down there for a couple of days. And he said to me before he died, he said, "Because of that Gene Kirkpatrick line, I took you out of the will." That was, that's what he said to me. I was out of the will. Now, I don't know what would have happened if I would have inherited all that land and money. It could have changed me. I could have like ended up in Coral Gables and being an anti-Castro financial supporter to some of these. Who knows what could happen to you? But by that time, the die was cast, and I was in that direction. And of course, you do things, you make mistakes. You calculate them. This is not going to go well with a lot of people. Just going to Russia right now, that angers a lot of people. And I'm sure, any day someone's going to walk in with a black suit on and says, all right, we're going through your files and seeing if I was on that's why I paid for everything. It cost me it was actually cheap over there, except for the airfare. But you don't know, but I had to go. And but all the things that I've done, I have no regrets over politically and career wise, because I could have played it real safe. A lot of people say to you, make the money first and then you get involved in causes. Make the money first and then you can get involved. But I was too impulsive, and I didn't like to see people in prison. Having my father in prison, I visited me 200, 300 prison visits back when I was working against the Rockefeller drug laws, and it killed me every time I'd walk out and have to leave that person there, and then to see his family later and saying, we're trying to get these people out, and it was a killer, man, to the point where I couldn't go anymore. In 2010, May 2012, I used to go up there with Charles Grodin, who got 4 people out of prison that I pointed him to. 4 women, made 5 women out of prison. Charles Grodin was really a real stand-up guy, but he knew how to work. He could work with Dale Volcker, who was this right-wing guy from, Erie County, I believe, and work with Joe Bruno, who I could work with too. Joe Bruno, whatever you think of him, was really good on this, and you could see him. I used to bring kids in there whose mothers were in prison, and he'd always lobbying him. And when the kids left, he took me aside and he'd give me a wad of hundreds to give to the kids. Okay, so nobody else did that. You know what I mean? So that's where he was. But he of course, he had his Republican, with a caucus that he had to mollify. But personally, he knew that was something wrong. That was wrong. So I mean, but he was able to tap into it. Grow. Now, I'm too impulsive to be able to do that. I want results right away. I'm not patient. And part of that is my father wasn't patient. My father had an anger streak, never hit me, but I wanted results, and like I said, it's a short life, man. It's a short life, and when I am the age of Salieri before he died in that sanitarium, I don't want to be compared to him, artistically, because of course he was a bum and Mozart had talent. But I will say, when you get to be that age and you start reflecting back, did I do this right or wrong? I want to say I did the right thing. I don't want to say, gee, I sold out at some point in time for just the money. How long are you going to keep the money anyway? What are you going to do? Build a temporary mausoleum, and then while you're alive, and then when you're dead, you're in it? What does it mean?
Well, I don't know if Roger Waters has relayed this. When he was a guest on the show, I asked him a similar question. I ask most of my guests kind of these pivotal type questions, and Roger's response when I asked him about, where he got his sense of justice and morality, he said it was from his mother. And he said, she said, read, and once you've done that, do the right thing. And
right.
That's...
Yeah, he said that I had a 2-hour interview with him, and he said exactly the same thing. He always ascribes it to, his father died fighting Nazis. Now they're calling him an anti-Semite, which is the most ludicrous thing in the world. It means he's effective in what he does, getting people to support what I consider to be the right thing, which is to free Julian Assange, or to stop the escalation of the war. All of that stuff that he's involved with. He's a powerful speaker. He's been on this long tour. for the last year and a half, and he makes waves, and he's got such a powerful personality and commitment to social and racial and economic justice, and he's a human rights crusader. And so you make choices, you start supporting Palestinians, and suddenly you're called an anti-Semite. That's like someone saying that, Credico, you're Italian. Italians suck because of Mussolini. I would say that would be a bigoted comment. I encourage people to say that Mussolini suck, or even the current Mussolini look-alike in Italy is. Italy's got a lot of problems. It's a poodle for the U.S. and they're part of NATO, and we control them. The Marshall Plan made the 25 European states, I guess, or 15. I don't know, but you can criticize Mussolini's foreign policy in Ethiopia, and I won't call you a bigot against Italians. Now, I live in New York. 99% of my friends are Jews. With Bobby Eisenberg today, my dear friend, wrote the book Boy Chick in the Hood. Richard Corey, Urban Corey, I'm with him yesterday, and Carl Kins. It's like I have a couple of Italian friends. I think my barber. And it's people have opinions here, and it's a very divisive thing. I love Jews. Do I like the state of Israel's government right now? No. I mean, that doesn't make me an anti-Semite. I don't support their position. I don't support what they're doing in Palestine, but I don't just blame them. I blame the U.S. because the U.S. finances them. So the blame can't be all put on Israel. The blame's got to be put on the who's underwriting a lot of this stuff. You can blame the U.S. for a lot of it. That's where it generates from, and it's too bad, man. I mean, look, it's a difficult line to walk, because when I was 10 years old, what was the first film I saw in school in my 5th grade class was Night and Fog, all about the Holocaust. So that was a good thing in the California school system, that we got to see what happens with anti-Semitism. But this is to oppose Israel. Foreign policy, not even opposing Israel, their foreign policy, domestic policy, they got to change it. I mean, they really have to change it. But Roger being called an anti-Semite when his father died fighting Nazis, all right? I've been around him for the last 2 years a lot, and I can tell you there is absolutely nothing to that, and it's just a way of trying to destroy a guy. It's almost worse than being a child pornographer. If you're tagged with that, you're ruined for life. If you're being tagged as an anti-Semite, you're ruined for life. So look what happened to Jeremy Corbyn, because he opposed Israel's foreign policy. People have to be reasonable on this and logical. But we live in a period of time. I guess this is never. It's always the same. There's been wars forever. There's been a fight for other people's property. As Sidney Greenstreet said in the Maltese Falcon to Bogart when he was talking about the Crusades, he said, "We all know the holy wars were largely a matter of loot." And they are. I mean, that's what this wars have been about from the very first fight, whether it be the Battle of Hastings. It was about getting that land. It wasn't about establishing a democracy, with the Romans conquering half the world, the Greeks, and it was all about land grabs, and
it still is.
It's look what they did in the Congo, the Belgians. Look what the French did in Chad, and the Dutch did in Africa, and the what do you call it? The Brits did, and even the Germans had colonies there. English for the longest period of time, straight through. I mean, with the East Indian Company, which was a private company, but they went out there to India and Bengal and Herat and all of that, and they roped all that stuff in for themselves. But that's the human race. If one country doesn't do it, another country does. That's the thinking. If we don't take their land, somebody else is going to, and they're going to be more powerful. That's how.
What's that? Is that Dr.
work.
John? That Dr. John song? If I don't do it, then somebody else will.
Right.
Randy,
right,
we gotta wrap it up pretty quick.
That was a long answer. I could have got that done.
No, it's fine.
2 minutes.
Before I let you go, is there any last words you'd like to say in a minute and a half or so?
Yes. Please tell the governor to pardon me when they get me on tax evasion. I'm kidding. No, I have no idea. What can I say is, keep fighting. Get off your cell phone. Get involved. Try to save this country from going into quicksand, which is quickly going in. And try to get other sources of information before the internet is completely controlled by Silicon Valley and a lot of guardrails there, and they're not going to be able to be informed. Mm-hmm. You have to really do it. As Roger Waters' mother said, you have to read. You have to read. If you don't read, you got nothing going in, so you got nothing coming out. Okay? If you're only watching television, you can talk about Carol O'Connor and the guy who just died from The Price is Right. But I would say you need, or the football score and how the guy did on 3rd and 5 in the fourth quarter, scrambling for a first down. I mean, you just have to put something in there. You can't make a cake with just, flour. That's it. You got to put ingredients in it. All right. And if you can't make pasta without a lot of garlic and olive oil and red pepper, all right, spice it up, folks.
Now we're talking. Well, Randy Credico, thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating, and I hope to have you back soon. And next time you're up in, I live here, so give me a call.
Where are you?
I live in Kingston, so.
All right. Well, I'll be there tomorrow, okay? All right, maybe we can grab a coffee. You send me your phone number, and maybe we get a coffee when I'm there. Maybe I'll have lunch with Fred Dick or somewhere there.
Okay.
Maybe I'll go to Adams and pick up some stuff to come back to New York City. But I don't know if I'm going to stay the night there, but I have to get I have one mechanic in the entire country that I like.
I'll have to get their name. I'll have to get their number.
What's that?
I'll have to get their number. I'm looking for a good one.
Yeah. It's the only place I go here, and the guy opens up the engine. I have a flat tire, and he says, "Let me look at the engine." He says, "That'd be $6,000. You need a new engine and a way." I said, "New car." He says, "Well, it's just my opinion, and I'll give you a rate." I can't take these auto mechanics, particularly here in New York City. Seriously.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you so much.
There's a great one on Everett Boulevard on Albany. I'm not going to say the name of it because I don't want to be doing a commercial. Albany, by the McDonald's, there's a great mechanic there, and they're fair and they're good, and they work on foreign cars. All right. Thanks a lot, Malcolm.
Thanks, Randy.
Thanks very much to Liz Hill.
Yes, of course.
For putting up with me.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Liz. We love you. Okay. We're going to say goodnight. See ya.
Now it's time to say goodbye. Say goodbye, George. Say goodbye, Gracie.
Say goodbye,
Bye, Gracie.
Goodbye.
See you later.
Goodbye.
Testing, shattered hopes and dreams adorn the floor. The face behind the screen has seen it all before. And the worst thing about it is there's more in store. Just another sacrifice to the lords of war. The royal family sell guns. The royal family sell bombs. That kill the world's poorest people. The government sell guns. The government sell bombs. That kill the world's poorest people. Sacrosanct march of industry. The sacrosanct march of industry does such strange things to people. The spectatorship of suffering. The spectatorship of suffering does all such strange things to people. imagination alive, cute as could be. You could see the gleam of mischief in her eye, carrying a kite to try and find a place where it could fly. Hovering not far, she saw what was a spaceship in her mind. Too young to really understand exactly what the buzz meant. Bread and water every day, other than that she's unfed. Pressure applied diplomatically to stop aid. Reality enforced by the air and naval blockade. Back to her, through her blood flows Qahtan. Ancient civilization, but its status has lost charm. She found a place to fly a kite in the soft calm. Some will say that her life was in God's palm. She heard her mother call, saw her